The first half of the panel is looking at the problems of territorial fragmentation, and our first speaker, over furthest away from me to the right-hand side, is Erik Gloersen, who works on the ESPON Bridges project. So, Erik, over to you for your introduction, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon to all. So I'm coordinating, as John just mentioned, the ESPON Bridges project, which deals with mountains, islands, sparsely populated areas, and coastal areas, so specific areas. And what strikes, I've been working on this for 15 years now, and on this topic, on and off. And what triggered it in the beginning was the European Treaty that started actually developing a narrative on these territories. And I would like to explain why we have a problem with a narrative that simply doesn't function. What this Article 174 of the treaty says, they approach these mountains, islands, sparsely populated areas as regions concerned by backwardness and handicaps. So this, the storyline, the narrative is basically, well, you're mountainous, so you have a handicap, and because you have a handicap, you will be backward. So that's what landed, this narrative that landed in at the Commission, and they had to decide what to do about it. So they launched these studies in the 2000s, and they found that there was no significant pattern of backwardness. So you looked at the evidence and you couldn't, the narrative simply didn't fit with any facts. And then the conclusion for that was, oh, then we're not having any specific programs for these areas. So basically the whole issue, you had a narrative that didn't fit with the facts, and so no specific programs. And this continues today, as with the European Parliament, the parliamentarians are still very preoccupied by these areas. So you have intergroups, you have parliamentarians coming together and voting resolutions on the fact that you would need specific measures for these areas. And the Commission comes back and dismisses these requests with reference to diversity of these areas. So there is really an issue of an impossible dialogue between two groups. When for regional stakeholders, people living in these areas, it seems so obvious that they are different, that they need specific arrangements for their situation. And this is then translated into parliamentarians, and the European Commission replies on the basis of statistical observations that there is no significant pattern of laggardness, and that these areas are not functional areas, so they, in terms of socioeconomic terms, so there is no real reason to focus on them. So really a typical example where the European citizen can feel that the European Union does not understand their specific challenges and cannot help addressing them. And it is then the paradox that the European level says that there is no room for European policy, and at the same time, we have lobby groups, so the regions come together spontaneously. There are big conferences on these topics. We have intergroups at the European Parliament dealing with this. So people spontaneously feel that this is a topic, but then policy-wise, it's just not possible to translate it into policy, it's just dismissed. So the underlying hypothesis somehow at the European Union level could be, well, these people don't know their own good. They come together, but actually, they shouldn't have any reason to come together because, well, there is no real reason to focus on them. One possible answer could be to say that, well, this argument is not irrelevant. If people come together, if people are prepared to communicate and have this cooperation and these types of soft interaction, which we have heard about this morning, maybe that's reason enough to build a policy, because people are coming together. So this is a context where you can use this as a lever to construct policies. So should you really then use the fact that you have evidence that doesn't fit be really a criterion to dismiss the entire topic? A second answer is more in terms of what do we need, what are these levers for? So maybe we are not talking precisely of a policy addressing social economic disparities, we're talking about solving solutions. So if you think of a cohesion policy that is result-oriented, that want to solve concrete issues, maybe these areas are relevant for very specific topics. So maybe it's meaningful to deal with mountains when you are trying to find solutions to make more resilient areas in the face of climate change. Maybe water resources are more difficult to manage in islands, so addressing cooperation, territorial cooperation for water is meaningful in islands, and they may need European impulses on that. Or landscape management can be relevant in mountain islands, sparsely populated areas. So topic-wise, if we bring in the territorial dimension of these more sectoral specific challenges, these territories suddenly start having another meaning. And third, there is there is a possibility of then the developing mountains, and it's possible that there is a narrative which is not holistic, which is not integrated, but is then focusing on these specific parts. So then if we take this stance, what can ESPON do about it? How can ESPON as a program try to feed into these and help these types of developments? Well, first about circumscribing these fields. We know, we've heard about territorialism. We know that territorial actors tend spontaneously to think of their own area as a place where we should have our own strategy. We should have built something closing the borders and saying, well, this is what we want to do in our area with these borders. Well, maybe circumscribing what fields, giving some hints of what kind of governance could be meaningful, taking these specificities as a starting point, these geographic specificities. Second, really operationalizing. So this dialogue we observe at the European level, we see that there is a narrative that spontaneously emerges in this dialogue between actors, but the European mountain doesn't exist. The mountains, actors from different parts of Europe come to these discussions with different mountains in mind, different islands, all have a different idea actually. So constructing these types of notions at the European level actually requires, it's much less trivial than it may seem. This needs to be built up, constructed with support from experts such as those gathered in program as ESPON. So just to conclude, I think this makes it worthwhile. To work on these topics at the European level because of their potential as levers of multi-level governments. It can help to make EU regional policy and territorial cohesion ambitions, bring them closer to the citizens. We have narratives such as community-led local development, integrated territorial investment. We see that they do not function as well as we wish they would. It is a very abstract notion. Imagine that we translate this into a mountain initiative. It's still doing the same thing. We're still saying, well, integrated territorial investment or community-led local development in specific areas, but we're not presenting it as some kind of abstract notion like that. We are bringing together actors that simultaneously have the same idea, the same representations, and we bring something that is closer to the preoccupation of the citizens, and that may be then caught and taken on board by them in a whole other way than an abstract notion, such as community-led local development or integrated territorial investments. So I just want to show how you can then move from an initial narrative that was very much, we are focusing on laggardness, and it doesn't work statistically, it doesn't work for the actors, to something which is more result-oriented and trying to bring general solutions closer to the citizens by playing on their perceptions and their own sense of belonging to specific territories, to specific types of territories, and to categories that are pan-European. Thank you.